Congressman Bridenstine, what do you see as the most pressing issue facing Congress when it reconvenes?
Well, there's no doubt that we have a continuing resolution in front of us that's going to be weighing on the minds of a lot of representatives. Certainly, we've got a debt ceiling increase that is going to be coming up towards the end of the year. But right now, I think the big question is the continuing resolution, funding the government, and what are going to be the requirements to get members of Congress to support the continuing resolution.
Do you think the Affordable Care Act should be defunded?
Well, I wouldn't say that the Affordable Care Act should be defunded, because I don't think anybody in Congress is talking specifically about that. What we should do is we should fund the government, just not the Affordable Care Act. And I think, you hear a lot of people saying, certain Republicans want to shut down the government. And that's not where I am. That's not where most of the Republicans I know are. We want to fund the whole government, just not the Affordable Care Act. So however you frame that, certainly I think that's important. But I think we should fund the government, just not the Affordable Care Act.
When Congress gets back together, you will have just 9 days to work out a budget deal. Do you think it will come together?
That's a great question, and the answer to that is I have great confidence that we will be able to get a continuing resolution done. But certainly, I got to tell you, I'm going to adhere to my principles, and I don't want to see the Affordable Care Act funded in this continuing resolution.
You have been listening to constituents. What are your top takeaways from your meetings that you've been holding with constituents in August?
I think right now the economy and jobs are on everybody's minds, and to the extent that that is, people understand that the Affordable Care Act is weighing down the economy. I talk to businesses regularly, and since I've been home, I've talked to a number of them who have more than 50 employees. Maybe they have 57, for example, one business. They're trying to figure out how to get down to 49 employees. There are other businesses that are taking their employees and they're reducing them down to 29 hours. So the economy is struggling. Everybody knows that. The president is saying that, and he bragged in the month of June that they created 195,000 new jobs. The reality is that we lost 200,000 full-time jobs and we picked up over 300,000 part-time jobs. That is not economic progress. And when you look at the unemployment rate coming down, the percentage of adults employed in the United States of America has not gone up, but the unemployment rate has gone down. How does that happen? Well, what is happening is overwhelmingly people are leaving the labor force. The labor force participation rate is now at the lowest rate it's been since 1979. This is not economic progress, and people understand that the Affordable Care Act, or as many people call it, Obamacare, as even he calls it, that this is an anchor around the neck of our economy, which is precisely why right before the 4th of July holiday, he announced that he was going to push back the employer mandate. He knows that this law is creating economic havoc. It is important that this law be repealed. When you talk about just how much money this law costs, we're talking about $500 billion in new taxes, taxes on pharmaceuticals, taxes on medical devices. These taxes alone have already driven thousands of jobs out of our country. But it's not just the new tax, it's also taxes on payroll and taxes on capital gains, taxes on the sale of real estate, taxes on things that have absolutely nothing to do with health care. But on top of that, you've got $500 billion in new borrowing and $716 billion robbed from Medicare today. It wasn't too long ago that Paul Ryan came out with the Ryan budget. And in that Ryan budget, we had premium support for Medicare. And it didn't change anything for anybody who was 55 or over. If you're 55 or over, if you were at or near retirement, nothing within Medicare would have changed for you. But the Democrats made a video of Paul Ryan throwing Granny off the cliff in her wheelchair, if you remember that. And what Obamacare does is it doesn't just rob Medicare, it robs Medicare today. Seniors right now today are having problems finding doctors that are willing to take new Medicare patients. And so this doesn't help. But the individual mandate as well is problematic. When you think about the fact that everybody in our country is going to have to buy health care that perfectly conforms to what the president wants us to have, and if you don't buy that health care, you're going to be penalized by the IRS on April 15th. All of us are going to have to prove to the government that we have the right kind of health care, and if we can't prove that, ultimately when Obamacare is fully implemented, we're going to be penalized 2.5% of our income. So if you make $50,000 a year, your penalty is going to be $1,250 on April 15th if you don't have the right kind of health care. If you make $100,000 a year, your penalty is going to be $2,500 assessed by the IRS. The Supreme Court has ruled that that's not a penalty, it's a tax, and therefore the Supreme Court says it's constitutional. Either way, it's bad policy. It needs to be repealed. The challenge here is we need to do it now. We're out of time. Once the subsidies start taking effect and we have millions of people addicted to the subsidies, it's going to be almost impossible to unwind this egregious law that is an anchor around the neck of our economy. So we've got to do it now. Ronald Reagan said that the closest thing to eternal life on earth is a new government program. And that's because you create a constituency of dependency. And that is exactly what Obamacare is going to do. I'm very proud that our governor has not expanded Medicaid under Obamacare. That will be a calamity for our state in the future when the feds start pulling the funding from it. But look, it's going to take courage from members of Congress to step up and make the effort to repeal this law or defund this law at the same level of intensity that Nancy Pelosi had to pass it when she said, we have to pass this to find out what's in it. And they passed it in the dark of night on a pure party line vote. This is an egregious law. And now they're upset because Republicans won't fix it. We cannot fix the worst parts of this law. It will fall apart. So that's why it needs to be repealed or defunded, and we need to do that now. We're out of time.
The drums of war are beating in regard to Syria. What do you think the United States should do in Syria?
Well, this is a very complex situation. What I would say is the president has drawn a red line, and I think he now understands that he drew that line prematurely. He drew it before his previous election, or his last election, and I think the reason he drew that line is because he wanted to be strong going into his election. The reality is he didn't probably believe that they would cross that line. That line has now been crossed. And it looks like we are sending ships, we are indeed sending ships to the eastern Mediterranean that have cruise missiles. So the question now before the president is he going to launch a strike on Syria? And here's I think, what my big reservation here is. There is nobody in the administration saying that our goal here is to tip the balance of the war in Syria towards the rebels. That's not the goal here. It seems to me their goal is to launch some missiles because he drew a red line. And that is bad foreign policy. But I think here's the most important thing that we all need to be aware of. And that is that when it comes to the president's authorization to take us to war, that authorization does not come from the United Nations. That authorization does not come from NATO, and it doesn't come from international bodies. Currently, the president's administration is saying that authority is going to come from an international coalition. Well, that's incorrect. His authority to go to war comes from the United States Congress. He has not made his case to go to war in this particular case. And certainly I am not going to authorize him to start doing airstrikes into Syria without making the case for here's anytime you engage in this kind of activity, the very first step is to say, what are the national security interests of the United States of America? And I don't see the president making that case. What he's saying is, they crossed the red line, we're going to launch some missiles, and we're going to go home. And that's bad foreign policy. But here's the thing. His authority comes from the United States Congress. He needs to make that case. If he makes the case, which right now I don't see that there's a case to be made, then he can get his authority. But the authority doesn't come from an international coalition.
As a former fighter pilot, what do you see as the U.S. role in Syria?
Well, this is a big question. On one hand, you've got the Assad regime, which is backed by Vladimir Putin in Russia when it comes to weapons, surface-to-air missiles, tanks, airplanes. Also on the side of the Assad regime, you've got backing by the mullahs in Iran, and you've got Hezbollah. So there is no doubt that the Assad regime is problematic. They are not friends of the United States, and certainly they would like the United States to be embarrassed in any way they can embarrass us. That's a problem. But you've got to consider who's on the other side of the Assad. Who are the rebels? That's the major question here. And as far as I can tell, and as far as anybody can tell me, the rebels are Al-Qaeda. The rebels are the Muslim Brotherhood. Again, these are not friends of the United States either. So again, we have to define what is the national security interest of the United States? And right now, on either side of this, I'm not seeing a national security interest for our country specifically. Now, if the president makes his case, I'd love to know what that is. But right now, I'm not there to say that it's okay for the president to start engaging in a civil war in Syria.
U.S. Representative Jim Bridenstine, thank you for your time.
Thank you.